buddy of mine and I try to camp twice a month now that I actually have a vehicle that can be trusted to get me to some more of the remote areas of our state. We planned a camping trip for this past weekend. We chose a fairly remote location that we had been to the previous weekend. It wasn't a designated campground. In the Pacific Northwest, if you drive far enough up the logging roads, eventually the gravel turns to dirt, the dirt turns to mud, and the cell service turns to no signal. That's where we like to be. My friend, let's call him Greg, is the type of guy who needs to disconnect. He works high-stress IT security, so for him the silence of the woods is the only therapy that works. I'm the driver and the navigator. He's the survivalist. It's a good dynamic. We arrived at the spot around 4 p.m. on Friday. It was a small clearing, overlooking a ravine, thick with Douglas firs that blocked out most of the late afternoon sun. It was distinct because of a large, moss-covered boulder shaped almost like a recliner right near the fire pit we had dug out the week prior. Looks like nobody's been here since us, Greg said, hopping out of the truck and stretching his back. He walked over to the fire pit and kicked a charred log. Woodpile is exactly where we left it. I killed the engine. The silence rushed in, immediately, heavy and ringing in my ears. I stepped out, taking a deep breath of the pine air, but stopped mid-inhale. "Greg," I said, my voice lower than I intended. "Look at the rock." Greg frowned and looked at the mossy boulder. Sitting dead center on the flat surface of the rock was a single, pristine AA battery. "Did we drop that?" Greg asked, walking over to pick it up. "I don't use loose batteries," I said. "Everything I have is rechargeable packs, and you use that solar brick." Greg rolled the battery in his fingers. He shrugged the gesture of a man who refused to be spooked by logic. Probably fell out of a headlamp last week and we didn't notice. Maybe a bird picked it up. Crows like shiny things. He tossed the battery into the bushes and started unloading the tent. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the way the battery had been placed perfectly upright, balanced in the center of the moss, didn't look like the work of a clumsy camper or a curious bird. It looked deliberate. It looked like a marker. I shook it off. The human brain is wired to find patterns where there aren't any, especially in the woods. We set up camp as the light began to fade. We had a solid system. I handled the tent and the sleeping pads. Greg handled the fire and the food. By 7:00 p.m., the fire was crackling, throwing, dancing shadows against the wall of trees surrounding us. We were drinking a couple of beers, talking about work when the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound exactly, it was the lack of one. The crickets and the tree frogs, which had been deafening 10 minutes ago, abruptly stopped. The woods went dead silent. Greg noticed it too. He paused, with his beer halfway to his mouth, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. "Coyote," he whispered. "Usually you hear them yipping," I replied, straining my ears. Then, we heard it. It came from the ravine below us, down the steep incline. It was the distinct wet crack of a heavy branch breaking under weight, not a deer stepping lightly. This was heavy, purposeful. "Bear," I whispered, my hand instinctively moving toward the hatchet I kept by my camp chair. Greg shook his head slowly. "Wind is blowing toward us. A bear would have smelled the bacon from dinner and come up the ridge, not down in the ravine." We sat in silence for 10 minutes. The fire popped, sounding like a gunshot in the quiet. I felt exposed. The light from the fire felt less like comfort and more like a spotlight announcing our position to whatever was down in that black void. "I'm gonna check the perimeter," Greg said, standing up. He grabbed his high-lumen tactical flashlight. Greg is the skeptic, the calm thinker, but I saw the tension in his jaw. "Don't go far," I said. He walked to the edge of the drop-off and clicked the light on. The beam cut through the darkness like a lightsaber illuminating the trunks of trees 50 yards down. He swept the light left, then right. Nothing he called back, though he didn't turn around. He kept the light trained on a specific cluster of bushes down the hill. "Greg," I asked. "I thought I saw." "Never mind," he muttered, turning off the light and walking back to the fire. He looked pale. "What?" I pressed. "What did you see?" He sat down and took a long pull of his beer. Just a reflection. Probably wet leaves. Or eyes. Maybe a deer. Deer don't snap branches like that, Greg. "Drop it, man. It's nothing. Let's not ruin the night." We tried to relax, but the mood was fractured. Every rustle of the wind made me flinch. Around 10:30 p.m., we decided to turn in. We put the fire out completely, something we usually didn't do, usually letting it die down to coals, but tonight neither of us wanted to be illuminated. We crawled into the tent. It was a 4-person dome, so we had plenty of space. I lay there in my sleeping bag, staring up at the mesh ceiling, listening. Greg fell asleep quickly, his rhythmic breathing filling the small space. I envied his ability to shut off his brain. I must have drifted off around midnight. I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was faint, rhythmic, scritch, 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 like long fingernails running down the nylon fabric of the tent. My eyes snapped open. The adrenaline hit me so hard, my chest hurt. The tent was pitch black. I lay frozen, praying it was a raccoon. The scratching stopped. Then, from right beside my head, separated from me by only a thin layer of nylon and the rainfly, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a whistle, not a melody, just a low 2-note whistle. But it wasn't a bird. The tone was breathy, human. I reached over and shook Greg hard. He groaned, shifting. I clamped my hand over his mouth before he could speak. His eyes went wide in the dark as he felt the urgency in my grip. I pointed a shaking finger toward the wall of the tent behind me. We lay there, 2 grown men paralyzed in the dark. Then the voice came. It was a whisper, but it didn't come from outside the tent. It sounded like it was pressed right up against the fabric inches from my ear. I found the battery. The voice was gravelly, wet, and mocking. Greg ripped my hand off his mouth and fumbled for his flashlight. He clicked it on, flooding the tent with blinding white light. "Who's there?" Greg shouted, his voice cracking. "I'm armed. Silence." Then a low, guttural laugh drifted away from the tent, moving toward the truck. "Get the keys," Greg hissed at me, grabbing his hatchet. "We're leaving. Now." "My keys are in the truck," I whispered back. Realization hitting me like a physical blow. I left them in the ignition so we could listen to the radio while we set up. We were trapped in the tent, the keys were in the truck, and whoever or whatever was out there was standing right between us and our only way out. That's when the truck horn honked. Once, long and loud. Someone was inside my truck. The horn blast died out, leaving a ringing silence that was somehow worse than the noise. "He's daring us," Greg whispered, his grip on the hatchet turning his knuckles white. "He wants us to come out." We had 2 choices. Stay in the nylon coffin and wait for him to come back with a weapon, or make a run for the truck. If the keys were still in the ignition, we had a chance. If he had taken them, we were stranded in the middle of nowhere with a psychopath. On 3, Greg hissed. "We run. I take the driver's side. You take passenger. Don't look at anything else. Just get in and lock the door. 1, 2, 3. Greg ripped the zipper down. The sound was like tearing canvas in the quiet night. We burst out of the tent, shoes skidding on the loose pine needles. The scene was surreal. My truck was 20 feet away. The cabin lights were on, illuminating the interior in a soft yellow glow. The driver's side door was wide open, swinging gently in the night breeze. But the seat was empty. We didn't stop to analyze. We sprinted. I dove into the passenger seat, slamming the door and hitting the lock button instantly. Greg threw himself into the driver's seat, pulling the door shut and locking it in one fluid motion. "Keys," I shouted. Greg looked at the ignition. The keys were there. He turned them. The engine roared to life. He threw it into reverse, the tires spinning in the mud for a heart-stopping second before catching traction. We shot backward, swinging the front of the truck around to face the logging road. That's when the headlights swept across the tree line. The beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the mossy boulder, the recliner rock where I had found the battery. Standing on top of the rock was a man. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't holding a knife. He was wearing a dirty, torn flannel shirt and suit trousers that looked 3 sizes too big. He was gaunt, his skin pulled tight over his skull, and his hair was matted in clumps. He was standing perfectly still, his arms resting at his sides. He was smiling. A wide, toothy grin that didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring directly into the windshield, directly at me. In his right hand, he held up a finger pointing at us. "Go, go," I screamed. Greg didn't need telling. He slammed on the gas, and the truck fishtailed onto the gravel road. We bounced violently over ruts and potholes, driving way too fast for the terrain, but neither of us cared. We drove in silence for 20 minutes until we hit the paved road. Only then did Greg slow down. "Did you see him?" Greg asked, his voice trembling. "Yeah," I said, rubbing my face. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely feel my skin. "I saw him." "No," Greg said, glancing at me. "Not the guy on the rock. The other one." "What other one?" "When I swung the truck around," Greg said, swallowing hard. "In the ravine. Just at the edge of the light. There were 2 more of them. Just standing there. Watching. We didn't camp for a long time after that. We reported it to the sheriff's department in the nearest town. They sent a deputy out to check the site a day later. The deputy called me back the following evening. We didn't find anyone," the deputy said, his tone professional but weary. "But we found your campsite. They did a number on your tent." "Slashed it?" I asked. "No," the deputy paused. "They moved it. They didn't collapse it. They picked it up, fully assembled, and moved it about 50 yards down into the ravine. And sir, yeah, we found a crawl space dug out under that big mossy boulder. It was covered with plywood and dirt. Looks like someone has been living under that rock for months. We found a stash of batteries, some old cell phones, and a driver's license belonging to a hiker who went missing in 2019. I hung up the phone. I felt sick. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part happened 2 days later when I was cleaning out my truck. I was vacuuming the back seat, trying to get rid of the pine needles, and the memory of that night. I reached under the passenger seat, the seat I had been sitting in as we fled, and my hand brushed against something cold and small. I pulled it out. It was a dictaphone, an old handheld voice recorder. I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the play button. I knew I shouldn't. I knew I should just smash it or give it to the police. But curiosity is a curse. I pressed play. There was static at first, then the sound of a car door opening. The sound of fabric rustling. My truck. Then a voice. That same gravelly, wet whisper I heard through the tent wall. They think they're alone. Greg looks tasty. But the other one sleeps with his mouth open. Then a low, wheezing giggle. The recording date was from Friday afternoon, while we were setting up the tent, while we were drinking beers, while we were sleeping. He had been in my truck before we even unpacked. He had been recording us the whole time, and when I ran to the truck to escape, I had been sitting right on top of his voice. People always say the scariest thing about camping is the wildlife. They worry about cougars or bears or stepping on a rattlesnake. They're wrong. An animal acts on instinct. If a bear attacks you, it's because it's hungry or protecting its cubs. It's violence, sure, but it's honest violence. People are different. People can hurt you just because they want to see what happens. My girlfriend Sarah and I decided to go camping in the Blackwood State Forest in late October. It was the shoulder season, too cold for the casual families, but not yet winter enough for the snow campers. We wanted isolation. Sarah had been going through a rough patch at work, dealing with a micromanaging boss, and she just wanted to scream into the void where no one could hear her. We arrived at the trailhead around 2:00 p.m. It was a hike-in site, meaning we had to park the car and backpack about 3 miles to the designated camping zone near the lake. "I love this," Sarah said, adjusting her pack straps as we walked. The leaves were a burning canopy of orange and red crunching, satisfyingly under our boots. "No emails, no Zoom calls, just us and the squirrels," I said, checking the GPS. We reached the lake around 3:30 p.m. The water was like glass, reflecting the gray sky. There were 3 designated sites, spread far apart along the shoreline. Site 1 was near the trail. Site 2 was on a small peninsula. Site 3 was set back in the tree line, denser and darker. We aimed for Site 2, the peninsula. It had the best view. As we approached, I noticed something flashing on a tree near the entrance to the site. "What is that?" Sarah asked, pointing. I walked up to the tree. Strapped to the trunk about shoulder height was a trail camera. It was a camouflage box with a motion sensor and a lens, the kind hunters use to track deer movement. "Game warden probably put it up," I said, though it felt weird. Usually, they put these deeper in the woods, not right inside a campsite. I don't like it, Sarah said, crossing her arms. I feel like I'm being watched. It's triggered by motion, Sarah. It's just taking pictures of deer, maybe a raccoon, or us peeing in the woods, she countered. I laughed, but I agreed to cover it up. I found a large maple leaf and wedged it into the strap so it covered the lens. There. Privacy mode enabled. We set up camp. We had a small 2-person tent and a lightweight stove. The evening was perfect. We made chili, drank hot chocolate, and watched the sun dip below the tree line. The temperature dropped fast, and the wind picked up whistling through the pines. Around 9:00 p.m., we were sitting by the fire when Sarah froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what music?" I listened. All I heard was the wind and the lapping of the lake water against the rocks. "I don't hear anything, babe." It was faint, like an ice cream truck melody, or a music box. "Sarah, we are 3 miles from the nearest road. Sound carries over water, but not that far." She rubbed her arms, looking behind her into the dark wall of trees. "I'm telling you, I heard it." To calm her down, I stood up and shined my flashlight into the woods behind our site. The beam caught the usual trunks, brush, ferns. Then the beam hit the tree with the trail camera. The leaf I had put over the lens was gone. "Wind must have blown it off," I muttered, walking over to fix it. I reached the tree and stopped. The leaf hadn't blown off. The stem was still wedged under the strap. The leaf itself had been torn away, shredded. A chill went down my spine. I looked at the mud around the base of the tree. There were footprints. Not boot prints, bare footprints. They were small, narrow, and they were fresh. The mud was still seeping into the impressions. "What is it?" Sarah called from the fire. "Nothing," I lied, my voice tight. "Just fixing the leaf." I covered the lens again, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't want to scare her. If I told her there was someone barefoot running around the woods in 40-degree weather, she'd panic. We'd have to hike back 3 miles in the pitch black. I walked back to the fire and sat down, moving my camp chair a little closer to the hatchet I used for kindling. "You look pale," Sarah said. "Just cold," I said. "Let's put the fire out and get in the sleeping bags. Body heat and all that." We crawled into the tent. I lay on the side closest to the door, keeping the hatchet inside the tent next to my head. Sarah fell asleep within an hour, exhausted from the hike. I couldn't sleep. Every time the wind shifted, I thought I heard footsteps. Around midnight, I saw it. The tent fabric was thin, glowing faintly from the moonlight outside. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the tent. It wasn't a tree branch. It was the silhouette of a head. Someone was standing directly outside our tent, blocking the moonlight. I stopped breathing. I slowly reached for the hatchet, my fingers wrapping around the cold rubber handle. Then the sound started. A pause. Another pause. It sounded like a camera shutter. Then Sarah woke up. She gasped, seeing the shadow looming over us. She whispered, terrified. The shadow moved. It didn't run away. It leaned closer. The silhouette of a hand pressed against the tent fabric right where Sarah's face was. Then a voice, soft, melodic, and terrifyingly calm, sang out from the darkness. "Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream." It was a child's voice, but it sounded wrong, distorted, like it was coming through a bad speaker. "Merrily, merrily, merrily, merrily. Life is but a dream." The singing stopped abruptly. Then the trail camera flashed. Not from the tree. The flash came from inside the tent, from the top vent. Someone had dropped the trail camera through the ventilation mesh. It landed on my chest. I grabbed it. The little screen on the back lit up. It wasn't in photo mode anymore. It was in playback mode. And on the screen was a video of us sleeping, taken from inside the tent just minutes ago. The angle was from the corner of the tent. Someone had been inside with us while we slept. For a second, neither of us moved. The image on the small LCD screen of the trail camera burned into my retinas. It was grainy, black and white night vision footage. It showed Sarah and me sleeping in our bags. But in the corner of the frame, crouched low, near our feet, was a figure. It was wearing a mask. Not a Halloween mask, but something that looked like burlap or canvas wrapped tight around the head with crude holes cut for eyes. The figure was holding the camera filming us. Then the figure's hand reached out in the video and stroked the bottom of Sarah's sleeping bag. I looked at Sarah. She was hyperventilating, her eyes fixed on the device in my hand. He was in here. She choked out tears streaming down her face. He was touching me. "We have to go," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Now. Leave the tent. Leave everything. Just grab your keys and the light." I grabbed the hatchet. Sarah grabbed her flashlight. I unzipped the tent door, slowly terrified of what I'd see on the other side. The woods were silent. The singing had stopped. "Run," I said. We burst out of the tent. We didn't bother with the trail. We just ran towards where we knew the main logging road was cutting through the brush. Branches whipped our faces and brambles tore at our jeans, but the adrenaline numbed everything. About 100 yards from the campsite, Sarah screamed. I spun around, raising the hatchet, thinking he had grabbed her. She was pointing at a tree to our left. Strapped to the trunk was another trail camera. As we looked at it, the red LED light blinked. It had just taken our picture. I shone my flashlight ahead. 10 feet further, another tree. Another camera. Another red blink. They were lined up, a corridor of cameras. He's tracking us. I realized a sick feeling settling in my gut. He funneled us this way. We veered right, trying to get off the path he had clearly laid out for us. We scrambled up a steep embankment, sliding in the mud. My lungs were burning. Suddenly, the music started again. "Row, row, row your boat." It wasn't coming from behind us anymore. It was coming from ahead of us. From the direction of the car, and this time, it was louder. We froze. "He's at the car," Sarah whispered. "He's at the car." "We don't know that," I said, though I was thinking the same thing. It could be a speaker. A Bluetooth speaker. We crept forward, moving slower now, turning off our lights to avoid being seen. The moon was bright enough to navigate by. We reached the gravel parking lot. My car was the only one there. It looked untouched. The singing was blaring, now distorted and skipping, echoing through the valley. It sounded like it was coming from the woods surrounding the parking lot, creating a surround sound effect of nightmare nursery rhymes. "I'm going to make a break for the driver's side," I whispered. "You cover me with the light when I signal." I sprinted across the open gravel. I expected a gunshot. I expected a tackle. Nothing happened. I reached the door, unlocked it, and threw it open. I dove in and hit the unlock button for Sarah. She sprinted and jumped in. We locked the doors. I jammed the keys in and started the engine. The headlights flared to life. And there he was, standing at the edge of the woods, right where the trail emerged. The figure from the video, the burlap sack was tied around his neck with rope. He was wearing a suit, a dirty, tattered tuxedo. He wasn't running at us. He was holding a clipboard. As the high beams hit him, he raised a hand and waved, like a director wrapping a scene. Then he pointed a finger at the tree next to him. Attached to the tree was a massive, professional-grade video camera on a tripod, the red recording light glowing steady in the dark. I slammed the car into drive and we peeled out of there, kicking up gravel. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. We drove straight to the state police barracks. We gave them the SD card from the trail camera that had been dropped in our tent. They raided the woods the next morning. They found the campsite. They found the corridor of trail cameras. They found speakers wired into the trees with hundreds of feet of cable buried under the leaves. But they didn't find the guy. They did, however, check the SD card I gave them. It didn't just have the video of us sleeping. It had videos from weeks prior. Other couples. Other campers. And there was one video file labeled the finale. The police wouldn't show it to us. But one of the officers told me later off the record what was on it. It was footage of a couple tied to chairs in a makeshift studio deep in the woods, forced to sing "Row, row, row your boat," while the man in the burlap mask sharpened a knife. We don't camp anymore, and every time I hear that song, I have to leave the room. I've been a solo backpacker for 15 years. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it to establish a baseline. I know what normal looks like in the woods. I know the etiquette. You don't pitch your tent right next to someone else's if there's space elsewhere. You don't make loud noises late at night. And you definitely don't touch other people's gear. Last November, I was hiking a section of the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. It's known as Rocksylvania because the terrain is brutal on your boots. I was planning to do a 20-mile day and camp at a shelter near a ridge. By 4:00 p.m., the weather turned. The sky went that bruised purple color that screams thunderstorm. I decided to cut the day short and set up a stealth camp off the trail before the rain hit. I bushwhacked about half a mile inland, finding a nice flat spot in a grove of hemlocks. It was perfect, hidden, flat, and protected from the wind. I set up my tent, a bright orange one-person trekking pole tent, and got my stove running to boil some water. That's when I saw the smoke. It was faint, drifting through the trees from about 50 yards away. My first thought was annoyance. I thought I had found a secluded spot, but apparently someone else had the same idea. My second thought was concern. The smoke was thick and dark, not the thin white smoke of a well-tended campfire. I decided to walk over and check it out, just to make sure they had their fire under control before the wind picked up. I walked through the hemlocks, the pine needles muffling my footsteps. As I got closer, I saw the campsite. I stopped, dead in my tracks. In the middle of the clearing was a tent. It was a bright orange, one-person trekking pole tent, identical to mine. Sitting on a flat rock nearby was a small camping stove. It was the exact same model as mine, a Jetboil Minimo, and hanging from a tree branch was a blue dry bag. The same brand, same size, same color as the bear bag I had just hung up back at my site. "Hello," I called out. No answer. The woods were dead silent, except for the wind in the upper branches. I walked into the campsite, my heart doing a weird flutter in my chest. It felt like walking into a mirror. I looked at the stove. It was lit. The flame was sputtering, running low on fuel, boiling a pot of water that had almost evaporated dry. "Is anyone here?" I shouted louder. Still nothing. I approached the tent. The fly was zipped shut. "I'm checking your tent," I announced, giving whoever might be inside a chance to respond. I reached out and unzipped the fly. The tent was empty. No sleeping bag, no pad, just the bare floor of the tent. But in the center of the floor, perfectly aligned, were photos. Polaroids. There were 6 of them arranged in a circle. I leaned in, squinting in the dim light. The first photo was of a red truck parked at the trailhead. My truck. The second photo was a shot of a man hiking away from the camera, wearing a green rain jacket. My jacket. The third photo was me stopping to tie my boot on a rock. The fourth was me turning off the main trail to bushwhack into the woods. The fifth photo was me setting up my tent taken from behind a tree maybe 20 feet away. My blood ran cold. The photos were fresh. The chemicals still smelled sharp. This person had been stalking me since I parked the car. They had followed me off trail. They had set up a duplicate campsite while I was setting up mine. But why I looked at the 6th photo, it was in the center of the circle. It wasn't a photo of me. It was a photo of the tent I was currently standing in. And in the dark opening of the tent door, seen through the mesh, was a hand reaching in to unzip it. My hand. I realized with a jolt of terror that the photo wasn't taken from outside. It was taken from inside the tent, facing out. The flash from the camera blinded me just as the realization hit. I wasn't looking at a photo. I was looking at the flash of a real camera firing right now from the darkness of the trees directly behind the tent. I spun around. Standing at the edge of the clearing, wearing a green rain jacket identical to mine, was a man. He had his hood up, shadowing his face. He was holding a Polaroid camera. As the photo developed in his hand, he shook it gently, then looked up at me. "You look better in person," he said. His voice was monotone, flat. Then he took a step forward, and then another. He wasn't rushing. He was walking with the casual confidence of someone who knows you have nowhere to go. I backed up, tripping over a tree root. I scrambled to my feet. "Stay back," I yelled, reaching for the knife on my belt. My belt was empty. I looked down. My knife sheath was gone. The man in the green jacket stopped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. My knife. "Looking for this?" he asked. He must have taken it off my belt while I was bent over looking at the photos in the tent. He had been standing right behind me, inches away, while I stared at his little display. "Who are you?" I stammered. "I'm you," he said, tilting his head. "But I'm the version that survives tonight." "I'm you," he repeated, "but I'm the version that survives tonight." He lunged. I didn't think. I just reacted. I threw my weight to the side, rolling into the wet ferns just as the blade slashed the air where my chest had been a second before. I scrambled up the muddy embankment, my boots slipping on the slick pine needles. "You can't run from yourself," he shouted. His voice wasn't monotone anymore. It sounded excited, manic. I didn't look back. I sprinted into the darkening woods. I knew the topography. Roughly there was a ridgeline to the east that led back toward the Appalachian Trail. If I could get to the main trail, I might run into a through hiker, or at least have a clearer path to run. The rain finally broke, coming down in freezing sheets. It turned the forest floor into a slide. I crashed through rhododendron bushes, the branches whipping my face, tearing at my clothes. Behind me, I could hear him. He wasn't running frantically. He was moving with a heavy, rhythmic thudding of boots. He was hurting me. I ran for what felt like 20 minutes, until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I crested a small rise and saw a familiar shape in the gloom. It was my tent, my real tent. I had run in a circle. In my panic, I had looped back to my original campsite. A desperate idea formed in my head. My keys were in the tent. I had bear spray in the side pocket of my backpack, which was inside the vestibule. If I could get to it, I stood a chance. I slid down the hill, crashing into the clearing. "Get the spray, get the spray," I chanted to myself. I reached the tent and ripped the zipper open. It was empty. My sleeping bag was gone. My backpack was gone. My keys, my wallet, my phone, everything was gone. The campsite had been scrubbed clean. I spun around, panic rising in my throat like bile. Then, I saw the light. A flashlight beam cut through the rain, coming from the direction I'd just run from. It bobbed closer. I dove behind a fallen hemlock log, pressing my face into the wet moss, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps stopped in the center of the clearing. "Naughty," the voice said. It was close, maybe 10 feet away. "You came back to the wrong home." I peeked over the rotting bark of the log. The man was standing there. He was wearing my backpack. He was wearing my orange beanie. He had my trekking poles strapped to the pack. He looked exactly like me. From a distance, even I would have mistaken him for myself. He took a Polaroid camera out of his pocket, my pocket on my jacket that he was wearing, and snapped a photo of the empty spot where my tent used to be. Then he did something that froze the blood in my veins. He turned to the empty clearing and began to talk. But he wasn't talking to me. He was rehearsing. "Yeah, officer, I don't know what happened," he said, mimicking my voice perfectly. The cadence, the pitch, it was spot on. I went for a hike, came back, and my gear was just gone. "Someone must have stolen it," he laughed. A dry, sharp sound. "No, that's not right," he muttered to himself. More distress. More shaking. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Please, you have to help me. There was a guy. He looked just like me. He was practicing his police statement. He was going to take my identity. He was going to walk out of these woods as me and leave me here to die of exposure or the knife." I realized then that if I stayed behind this log, I was dead. He had the weapon. He had the gear. He had the warmth. I waited until he turned his back to adjust the straps on my pack. I grabbed a fist-sized rock from the mud. I stood up and charged. He heard me coming. He spun around, dropping the camera, reaching for the knife on his belt, my knife. I didn't give him the chance. I swung the rock with every ounce of fear and rage I had. It connected with the side of his head with a sickening crunch. He went down hard, face planting into the mud. I didn't wait to see if he was conscious. I didn't try to get my pack back. I didn't try to get my keys. I ran. I ran until the sun came up. I didn't feel the cold anymore. I didn't feel my feet. I was in a trance of survival. I reached the highway around 7:00 a.m. A trucker pulled over when he saw me stumbling on the shoulder, covered in mud and blood. The police arrived quickly. I told them everything. I told them about the duplicate campsite, the photos, the mimicry. They were skeptical, but the head wound I had from where I fell during the run convinced them I had been attacked. They found my campsite. Or rather, the spot where it had been. It was empty, just as I said. They found the copycat campsite a half-mile away. It was also empty, but they found something in the mud where I had hit him with the rock. They found a wig. a cheap brown wig that matched my hair color exactly, and a pair of colored contact lenses. They never found the man. They never found my car. He must have had a key or found mine in the pack and hiked back to the trailhead while I was running to the highway. My credit cards were used 2 days later at a gas station in Ohio, then a motel in Kentucky. He's still out there, but here is the part that keeps me awake at night. The part that makes me check the locks on my doors 3 times before bed. About a month after the incident, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was my driver's license, my real one, and a single Polaroid photo. The photo was of me sleeping in my own bed in my apartment. The date stamp on the bottom right corner was from the night before I received the package. On the back of the photo, in handwriting that looked exactly like my own, was a message: "I'm doing a better job at being you than you are. But don't worry, I'm bored now. You can have your life back. I found someone new to play with." I moved the next day. I changed my name. I don't go into the woods anymore. But sometimes when I'm walking down a crowded street, I'll see someone in the corner of my eye. Someone wearing the same jacket as me. Someone with the same walk. And I wonder, is that him, or am I just looking in a mirror?